Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm going to talk about a traditional story and comment on it today. So, this is the story. This takes place in ancient China. The story is a monk asked Master Zhou, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? Does a dog have Buddha nature or not? And Master Zhou said, no. A monk asked Master Zhou, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? And Master Zhou said, no. Usually they translate it as Master Zhou said, mu, which means no. They usually leave it in translations. But what are we talking about? First of all, Buddha nature. That is the fundamental teaching of Mahayana Buddhism. It is that we all have the same fundamental nature. We're all connected. We're all empty. There's an inherent oneness to things. All of that is Buddha nature. It is that we have awakening already. It's just something we're trying to tune into. It's not something we're lacking. Nothing's lacking. No one's left out. Our true nature is awake, mindful, compassionate, free, all those things. And it's one of the things I really like about Buddhism. It's sort of the opposite of the teaching of original sin. It's the teaching of original inherent awakening. It is basic goodness. It is that human beings are basically good. And in fact, all beings are basically good. Everything that's alive has awakening at its core. And that sure is hard to believe sometimes. But that's the teaching. It is that at our core we are awakened. We are all Buddhas. Buddha means awakened one. So, it's maybe a hard thing to accept when we see how big the struggle is in the world. It's hard to accept that we all have this inherent goodness at our core. I like to think of that quote by Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, where he said, I used to be scared as a child by what I saw on the news, and my mother told me to always look for the helpers, because there are always helpers. I like to think of that. Like, that is where we can see the manifestation of Buddha nature, just by looking for the helpers. There are always helpers, okay? So, monk goes to Zhou and he says, does a dog have Buddha nature? And Zhou says no. One, why is the monk asking? That's the fundamental question. And what I think is that the monk is trying to get Zhou in some kind of trap. And I do have to mention, in ancient China, dogs were considered a pest, a filthy animal, not something people liked. So if this was in the modern world, we might say, does a rat have Buddha nature? Or does a bug have Buddha nature, okay? And that's important to note. They're not thinking of our obedient and loyal man's best friend. They're thinking of a pest that they don't like having around. So the monk says, does a pest have Buddha nature? Does this creature that I don't like have Buddha nature too? And Zhou, he's a famous and renowned teacher, and he says no. Okay, you following me? So, Zhou says no when the monk asks if a dog has Buddha nature. So, why? So the monk, maybe he's really not understanding this fundamental teaching of Buddhism. That could be. It could be that the monk is trying to catch Zhou in some kind of wordplay, some kind of trick. He's trying to test the master. We don't really know. But this is held up as a really important story. This is what's called a Zen koan or a Chan kongon. It is a teaching that uses words to kind of break through and bring us something important, an important message. That's the point of this. So what's the message? Why does Zhou say no? Why does he say no? We can speculate on why the monk is asking, but what's more interesting is why is the master saying no? I think that if the master just said yes, that would be sort of boring. First of all, I think we can address that. It'd be boring if he just said, does a dog have Buddha nature? Yes. I think, yes, everything has Buddha nature. We wouldn't remember that. That would not be interesting. It would not come down to us through the sands of time. that would be gone because it's not interesting. It's just a simple yes or no answer to a simple question. But I think it is deeper than that. I think the monk, my sense of the story is that the monk has a low self-image, like many of us do. So when he's asking, does a dog have Buddha nature, he is saying, even me? Even me? With all my flaws? We definitely think that way sometimes, right? With all my flaws, surely I don't have awakening at my core. I give in to temptations too much. I don't focus well enough. I don't pay well enough attention. I'm lost and confused so much of the time. Surely I don't have Buddha nature. I can hear the teaching that all beings have awakening as their nature. All beings are basically good, but that can't include me, right? It can't. So I think when the monk is asking, does the dog have Buddha nature, he's also asking, do I, even a lowly person such as me, do I really have awakening as my true nature? And does he? Yes, no one's left out. No one's left out. Even a person we really don't like. Even the worst person has basic goodness as their nature. We are just deluded and confused and too attached to the things we're obsessed with and too aggressively opposed to the things we don't like. We're clinging too tightly and we're sleepwalking through life and we're missing important things, and that is why it seems like we're not enlightened. That is why it seems like all beings are not Buddhas, because we're lost and confused. And this can be sort of a hard thing to think about, a hard thing to accept. We think, well, even this person, and even that person? How can it be that that person who committed this act against me has awakenings their true nature? Surely not. That is the struggle to accept. That is the struggle to accept. Our true nature is good. We sort of have this divided vision of ourselves. Sometimes we see ourselves as really elevated, like as the best and smarter than other people and better than we are, and other times we do the opposite and we see ourselves as lowly and the worst. Everybody's prettier than me, everybody's better than me. Those are the two things that we struggle with, both of those, and we're rarely in the reality. We're rarely in the center, which is the truth is in the center. The truth is in the center. You're not better than everyone and you're not worse than everyone. That's absurd. We are almost all right in the middle. And so we might struggle with that, and we might think, I know when I first learned this teaching, like, it seemed really good and I really liked it, but also it seemed like, really? Me? Me? Because I don't see myself as an incredibly wise individual. I make all sorts of mistakes. And I think we all do. So do we have Buddha nature? Do we really have innate wisdom and awakening and compassion at our core? Is that really true? Can that be true? But also I think Joju is challenging the monk to sort of stop clinging so much to this and that. To this and that. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Is a dog a filthy animal? These are all words also, and we have to think about that too. We're putting labels on everything and pretending they're true. And even goodness is a label. And even filthy is a label. And even Buddha nature is a label. These are all labels we're putting on things, and I think that we can think about that, and we can think about the areas where our words fail us, because at times they do. At times they do. So when we're sort of dividing things into little categories, we get mixed up sometimes. And that is something we need to think about as far as things like good and bad. And also as far as things like sacred and profane. I think we do that. And so I want to say not sacred and profane, but spiritual and ordinary. How's that? That's a little better. Spiritual and ordinary. We think, well, in the temple, I'm doing my spirituality, but in the rest of my life, I'm like a normal person. I'm ordinary, right? And that's really not true. This is really a lifelong process, and it's a full-time process. We want to bring this into all of our lives rather than just trying to be spiritual when we're on the meditation cushion or in the temple or at the specific time, but actually all the time. So Joju is not only testing the monk to see if the monk is testing him, but also he is bringing attention to the fact that this monk is really mired in thinking about these categories too much. He's thinking about dogs are bad. How can a dog have Buddha nature? And he wants Joju to answer. But Joju is challenging him to just accept that bad is a label he's putting on the dog. It's a label he's putting on the dog. Would he think would dogs be bad if people weren't around to judge them? No. They would just be, right? And again, to an extent, I think the monk is also labeling himself as bad. So Joju is challenging that dichotomy of I'm bad, I'm lowly, I'm not good enough. Joju is challenging that, and he's saying, no, you don't have it quite right. That's Joju's statement here. You don't have it quite right. Because you're asking. The fact that you're asking is the problem. There is a famous quote by a Zen teacher in the Korean tradition, and he said, open mouth already a mistake. And that is, the fact that you're asking a question shows that a question like this shows that you don't have it. So, does a dog have Buddha nature? My answer is yes. And more importantly, so do you. So do you. Does the dog have Buddha nature? Yes, and so do you. And so does the monk in the story, and so does Joju. All beings are innately awake. We are all Buddhas. It's a hard thing to accept about others, just as hard to accept about ourselves. But that is the truth. Basic goodness. Inherent awakening. Constant wakefulness. That is what we are. And the hope is that makes the path a little bit less daunting. Because we remember that, our true nature is awakened. We're not going through levels like in a video game. We're there already. We just have to recognize we're there. We're not trying to gain anything good. We're trying to cut away the things that aren't our true nature. We're trying to cut through the way we cling to things too hard. We're trying to cut through the way we don't see the world clearly. We're trying to get around that stuff and see the world as it is. Because when we see the world as it is, then we can make better decisions, then we can live in a better way, then we can pay better attention to the world around us and show more compassion and be more loving and mindful and peaceful. And that is where it's at. So, does a dog have Buddha nature? Yes, and so do you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Have a good day.